30% of the barriers to digital are the technology and the data. 70% of it is changing the culture, changing the workflow. And in healthcare, it's particularly difficult. I think that there's so much regulation, there's so much attention to safety, and there's such a conservative approach to changing the way we do business because of all of those safety concerns, that it creates a higher barrier in healthcare than you see in other industries. I think what we're realizing and what we've learned in COVID is that you can do both. You can sustain a safe clinical environment and still make radical change to how things are done. And I'm hopeful that this will be a long-term change in our mindset.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast, with your host, Christine Winoto.
Today's guest is Joe Bengfort, the Chief Information Officer and Senior Vice President of Informational Technology here at the University of California, San Francisco, and UCSF Health. Joe is at the forefront of technology at UCSF. In this episode, we discuss digital transformation, safety, and privacy concerns for healthcare organizations, and what healthcare may look like in a post-COVID world. One aspect of digitization is the appointment process. Scheduling may seem simple, but it is a vital step that can make healthcare more or less efficient. Technology that allows patients to schedule their own appointments was available at UCSF prior to COVID, but it was not well utilized or supported by the organization as a whole. When the pandemic hit, UCSF hospitals had to cancel non-essential surgeries, but now UCSF is using self-scheduling technology to help patients receive the care they need. Listen on to find out what Joe sees for the future of technology and the healthcare industry. I hope you enjoy our conversation, and if you like what you hear today, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite app. Thank you, Joe, for joining us today. It's a busy time for you during the past. It must be really busy, but I feel like with this whole COVID-19 shelter in place, there's a lot more stuff on your plate. More people doing work from home and then the telehealth. And so how is it? How does UCSF cope with all these new changes?
Well, the first thing you do is you work at home and you throw out the 8-hour days, which we rarely had anyway, and you convert all your travel time into work time and all of your break time into work time. And we're all learning that we have to define boundaries more purposefully now than we did whenever we drove to work and then at a certain time drove back home. Now you're just constantly at work. But it's been a very exciting time for IT as well. Even though the hours are long and it's crazy, we're making a tremendous amount of progress in many aspects of data and analytics and digital than we have historically.
Is this something that I'm sure you guys planned this before the COVID-19 and things just accelerate much faster, or it was completely new?
No, actually, I'll give you a couple of examples. One is you hear about a lot from other institutions as well, and that's in the space of telehealth. We had done a lot of work. I think it was probably 5 years ago I hired our telehealth director. And she has been building not so much the technology, because that's fairly simple actually in the telehealth space, but she's been building the clinical workflows, the compensation, getting paid for that kind of work, all of the policies and all of those, non-technical aspects she has built up over the years. And so, we were up to something like 3,000 telehealth visits a month. And then this hit, and we did, our peak was about 55,000 telehealth visits in 1 month. The reason we could ramp up in a month and a half is because of all of that work that had been done in advance. Same kinds of things with something like self-scheduling. So think of self-scheduling your appointments, in the ambulatory setting or procedural setting. We've had that technology in our electronic health record for years, but it's all of the workflow and the almost cultural change you have to make within the faculty practice in order to make self-scheduling effective. There were so many barriers to changing that culture and a lot of that workflow that we didn't make much progress until we got to COVID-19. And then it was really in the recovery from COVID. And after we had canceled so many appointments and now we have to reschedule so many things, that there was a lot of openness in the organization to leveraging the technology so we could scale that up. So again, we had it in place. It just wasn't embraced the way that COVID has really opened all of our minds.
So you think it's the technical aspect of things are there. It's just the people part needs to participate to make the whole technology work.
I will tell you that my numbers may be off a little bit here, but 30% of the barriers to digital are the technology and the data. 70% of it is changing the culture, changing the workflow. And in healthcare, it's particularly difficult. I think that there's so much regulation, there's so much attention to safety, and there's such a conservative approach to changing the way we do business because of all of those safety concerns, that it creates a higher barrier in healthcare than you see in other industries. I think what we're realizing and what we've learned in COVID is that you can do both. You can sustain a safe clinical environment and still make radical change to how things are done. And I'm hopeful that this will be a long-term change in our mindset.
So help us understand in your role at the university and the health, our UCSF Health, what is your role and how you bring the technology to help improve the efficiency of delivering the care and information?
So my title is Chief Information Officer, and I came in initially as the CIO for the UCSF Health system. And about 3 years in, the CIO on the campus side of our university decided to retire. And so I inherited a whole new opportunity. So for the last, I've been here for 8 years, and I think for the last 5, I've had both campus and health. Now, I think one thing I always like to point out, especially in an academic medical center, information technology exists in many parts of the organization. And I would say, maybe half of it is centralized and managed centrally, and the other half exists in departments. And so and probably the most serious part of my role, the thing that I think is most important, is to help the organization to develop not so much centralized IT, but connect the parts of information technology that exist in departments and that exist in central groups so that we're functioning more as one team. Organizationally, it doesn't really matter. Functionally is what matters. And so, in that way, I'm kind of more of a coach and glue to help glue the pieces together. I'll just add one other thing to this because I feel quite passionate about it. I think departmental IT, especially in an academic health center, is extraordinarily important and valuable. There are many CIOs that might say there's too much of it. I say it's critical to be there. We just have to learn better on how to connect the pieces, and so that's what my job is.
And I think sometimes, at least when I hear about the information in the health center, medical center, tend to be all about patient health records. And how do you ensure security? And now that, more people working from home, and is that another challenge that you guys have to manage?
Yes.
Because it's not quite I read on the news, there's somebody who wants to, there's a lot of hackers targeting people working from home now.
Sure. Security has always been a pretty big concern. Of course, at UCSF, it takes on a whole new level because we are all health sciences all the time, whether you're talking about the research mission, the education mission, or the patient care mission. And those things don't really work in isolation from each other. They're very connected, which is one of the most powerful differentiators of our organization. So, information security has been maybe a little more of my time that I would prefer, but it's such a major issue in the world today that I spend a great deal of my time on it. The move to remote was difficult, but it wasn't insurmountable, primarily because one thing that we do here, we do accept a lot of bring your own device. And we have security suite, we call it the security suite, that we require people to install even on a device that they own. If they're going to use it for UCSF work and access our network, they have to run the security suite. And that essentially protects our data on their devices. So when we made the move for people to be working from home, again, we already had that underlying infrastructure. We just had to scale it up. And scale up some of our network access, because instead of everybody working inside the network, suddenly they were working outside. So we had to turn things inside out in a few days. But we've survived it, and now we're focused more on making collaboration tools more highly functional. So we rolled out Office 365 and Microsoft Teams and OneDrive and those kinds of things that we're now working on, helping people adopt those kinds of collaboration technologies.
This more for like the internal use. And how about collaborating with a new technology that improves the efficiency of the patient care? How do you work with people, new technology?
Well, there are several ways. I mean, of course, the center of the patient care universe is the electronic health record. And so when we can, we leverage the functionality within that environment. Now, we happen to be an Epic shop. We use the Epic electronic health record. But as with any large, complex piece of software, it takes more time to innovate. You essentially have to wait longer for innovation. So we do a lot, what we call innovation on the edges of the medical record. We have an organization called the Center for Digital Health Innovation that I work very closely with as a partner, and they really do a lot of work to understand the landscape of what's happening in the technology marketplace for clinical workflow, type tools. And so we work closely with them, and we also do a lot of our own research with different vendors. What drives us at the end of the day are the problems we need to solve in the clinical enterprise. And then we turn around and go to market and look for solutions to those problems. CDHI is driven a little bit differently, but not that much. I mean, they have a more open lens, and they're looking at, well, what's the art of the possible? What are the things out there that are solving problems that maybe we haven't even thought about yet? So that's how those two things blend together, and how we keep track of this crazy world of technology.
So if I ask you like 3 of the top things that worries you or concerned you that it needs to be solved, what are the top 3 areas?
Well, I don't know if I can get it to 3. I think...
Is it more?
It is more. To put it in context, The problems that we had pre-COVID, we have in during and post-COVID, if we ever get to post-COVID.
Mm-hmm. We hope.
So, we hope. One of the areas is in patient communications. We really have not relied on technology like many other firms who have a very deep understanding of their customer and can deliver relevant and timely content to their customers. We really haven't applied that sort of approach to patients. Now we're faced with the issue of patients being, their confidence in going out and about, their confidence in going into a patient care setting is damaged through all of this COVID activity and the fear that's out there. So being able to communicate with our population in a very purposeful and a very relevant manner from one cohort of patients to the next is a problem that we're solving now using customer relationship management kinds of software. We also just have, some new problems, I guess you would say. One is our workforce now, we have obligations that we didn't have before in terms of our workforce and our patients and our visitors into our clinical settings. We have to screen them. So there are specific requirements, and it varies from one city to the next. It's different in Oakland than it is in San Francisco, than it is in Marin. And we have to screen according to those requirements. And so we've used digital to develop applications, apps that allow us to do that in a more consistent and efficient sort of way.
You mean to screen the UCSF employee when they come, or what do you mean by screening?
By screening, I mean, it's simple things. There's just a good deal of complexity to it. But, have you been exposed to someone with it? Have you had a fever in the last 3 days? The questions like this. And being able to, we essentially have developed, along with an outside partner of ours, a screening application. They're fairly common now. When we first got started, they weren't all that common. That was just 3 months ago, so things do move fast. But we don't just have to screen workers. We have to screen the patients. We have to screen now. For a while, we weren't allowed to have visitors in the hospital, period. You had to go in alone. Now we're allowing one person in with a patient, and you have to screen them as well. You have vendors that have equipment or provide other services inside the hospital or inside of the ambulatory setting. And they all have different points of entry into a hospital. So think of a physical building with lots of entryways, and it becomes really quite complex when you think about how porous an environment like that is. So we've had to literally change the physical access to the building. So we limit the number of access points and then screen everyone based on the kind of person that's coming in. I talked a little bit about scheduling. Scheduling has been a challenge in that, we canceled tens of thousands of appointments. And now we need to try to catch up and to catch up in a safe manner. So, a lot of self-scheduling tools. And then, one of the problems that existed pre-COVID that we still have yet to deal with is in the area of our inpatient setting. Our census really runs high, right? We are quite lucky in the healthcare industry to have a great reputation, great quality statistics, great outcomes, and therefore a lot of demand. And so we need to be more efficient about how we flow patients from their home into the hospital and back out again. And to be able to do that in a way that it's a more pleasant experience for our patients, but also in a way that's more efficient for our hospital. We are capacity constrained. We're going to build a new hospital, but it takes 8 or 9 years to pull that off.
Right.
We're capacity constrained, and we have all this demand. So we're working on ways of improving our capacity management, our throughput, and just the quality of our patients' experience in a hospital that's so busy.
This podcast is sponsored by Brown Ratnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that helps life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownratnick.com.
So how can IT improve that experience for the patient, especially in the inpatient setting?
Yeah. Most of what we're focused on right now is not so much patient-facing technology, although we do have some. I can give you an example in a moment. But specifically on the throughput part for the hospital, it's really using data, using visualization technologies, so dashboards, and using ultimately predictive analytics, but analytics of various kinds that help us understand more about the operation of the hospital, more about the flow of patients and what their experience is. So you can look at the data, most of which comes from within the medical record, but look at that data and understand more about what they're experiencing. So we try to look at the data through the patient's lens. And if we don't have technology that directly measures their experience, we use our data as we get the closest proxy to their experience. So how long were they, when did they get their vitals checked, get triaged, and then when did they get admitted to an ED room? Mm-hmm. How long did they wait? Right. So we can extract those kinds of things. And from the time orders are placed until a result comes back and until somebody actually gets into the room to talk to the patient about it, we can look at that data through the lens of the patient and get a feel for their experience. And then we work to try to improve the patient's experience by addressing those specific touch points. There are areas where we're using technology more direct to the patient. So like in the Ortho Institute, we use a product. It's another third-party product. It's not in the medical record to help with all of the pre-op preparations and communications back and forth with the clinic, and to make sure that they understand exactly what they need to do, what's going to happen to them. And it gives us a way before they're in for their surgery and after they leave to have a very rich conversation and provide a lot of data back and forth. So that with those technologies, it's a direct patient experience. Then the last example I'll give you in the cancer center, we use real-time location services, which is basically I don't know if you've heard of RFID tags, but it's essentially a tag that you can track and you can see the flow of a patient through the cancer center, right? From when they arrive until they have infusion, until they have whatever procedure that they're going to have. And that kind of tracking, we track the flow of the patients, we track equipment, and we track caregivers. And you end up with lots and lots of raw data about what's happening in the hospital. And you can use that data in very creative ways to start to understand the patient's experience, the caregiver's experience, maybe even in our setting, the learner's experience with residents and whatnot, and find ways of improving that over time.
How often do you look at that data and then change your workflow based on the data?
Now, Christine, you're getting close to something I would say, well, I'm not sure I want to advertise that. So you've hit on a very, very important point, and that is making day-to-day decisions, and for that matter, even making strategic decisions driven by data is actually a discipline that you have to learn. This might sound surprising, but in academic medical centers, a lot of decisions are made based on experience. Right? I mean, the whole tradition of medicine has been on, one experienced physician sharing their experience and teaching the other person. And really, so that makes it, that mindset is embedded in many aspects of healthcare, not just here, but everywhere. And changing the mindset of, I need more than just to look at a dashboard and go, whoa, that's really cool. I've never seen that before. And into, okay, what is this data telling me? And what's the next level of insight that I need? The next level of analytics or data that could get presented to me that will actually help me change what I'm doing. So I would tell you the direct answer to your question would be, in terms of how often do we use the data to change our practice? Not nearly enough is my general answer. But it is something that we're spending a lot of time and effort on. We want to develop analytic capability, data analysis muscle, not just in a central analytics department or a departmental IT, but in actual the people that are doing the work on the floor. So that takes time, right, to get that spread through the culture. But that's our intent.
I think also sometimes depending on the metrics, right? If you meet that metrics, then people tend to kind of like, we're doing fine. But if you're below your success metric, that's when there's more urgency. We need to change the process.
Yeah, that's right. And we use a system on the healthcare side at UCSF called Lean. I don't know if you're familiar with Lean, but it's basically the Toyota method. So the Toyota method in manufacturing is a very long and complex subject, but we use some of the very same principles inside of the healthcare system in order to take waste out of our processes. And that's there are important concepts baked into that you just touched on. And one of those is, yes, you want to collect data, you want to have metrics, and you want to attain a goal. But that's not the end, that's the beginning. And you want to iterate and iterate and iterate until you always iterate, because you always are trying to move towards perfection, right? That's the core of the Toyota method.
Right.
And that's, again, I think culturally that takes years to get in place. We've been doing Lean now for at least 3 years. And now we're just getting a little better at applying data and technology to those solutions versus just trying to physically improve the process. We're trying to change who provides what data when in the process. Because it turns out data is what drives the whole thing. And if we can change our lens to who gets what data where in the process, it can be really transformational.
Mm-hmm. Well, not maybe slightly different topic, different subject, but still in the data. You mentioned earlier about the hospital have different vendors with, that provide the technology. So how do you make sure they all speaking the same language? I guess that's the interoperability. So if a company or a startup who are interested in working with UCSF Health, what are the sort of things that they need to have before they even consider approaching UCSF Health?
Well, integration is an extraordinarily important concept. If I were to give your external partners advice, it would be security and integration would be the two biggest things they need to invest in. The integration part is, all about how do I get the data I'm collecting here processed in a way and then fed into the medical record that it can arrive at the point of care and have immediate impact. And it's through real-time interfaces where that happens. The traditional standard, something called HL7, we have a very substantial team that supports HL7 integration. The more modern one is called Smart on Fire, FHIR. Don't ask me what that acronym stands for because I constantly forget it. But it's essentially a web services interface that's more flexible and more real-time that most providers like healthcare apps or devices that want to integrate directly into some other environment, that they use that standard. So if you think about the Apple Health application, we have through a Fire we support the Apple Health app. So that Fire interface, basically, once you authenticate who you are, take your data from the medical record, transfer it into the health app, the Apple Health app, so that you have it in your custody. So it's through that sort of, they're called APIs, application program interfaces. It's through that Fire API that we make those kinds of things happen.
Do you tend to work as, sometimes when I used to work at Kaiser, you tend to work with the larger technology company because of they understand scale. How do you work with a mid-size or small-size technology company?
We do it more than you might imagine. It is often driven by what's available from an incumbent vendor. So think about Epic. If Epic has the problem solved, why would I spend the money on yet another product? And it's never that easy of an answer, because usually you can get more features, a better patient experience by going with a more modern standalone product. But then there's more expense, and the cost of healthcare is already too high. So the expense aspect of it has a lot to do with it. However, if the functionality isn't available in the medical record, or if it isn't adequate, then we look to outside partners. And when it comes to the healthcare space, there's many, many small firms. I'll give you an example. Actually, it goes quite far back. When we built the Children's Hospital, we wanted an experience. We wanted an engagement experience for our patients in the Children's Hospital. And of course, Mark Benioff's name is on the building because he was so incredibly generous in terms of donations to build that hospital. And Mark said, "Look, I don't want my name on a hospital that doesn't have a high tech feel." Those aren't his direct words, but that's the gestalt of it. And there really wasn't much available back in 2013 that we could do. And we found a small firm out of Ireland. Was not yet. I think they were on their first round of venture capital funding. They might be on their second, but they were early on in the process. And we pitted them against a few well-established, I won't name names, but well-established firms that offered patient engagement systems. And ultimately, we went with the startup. That firm is doing quite well at this point. We essentially made the company. But what they offered was a very high-featured, high-touch experience for patients in the bed at the hospital. So a big screen TV, a tablet at the bedside. They could order their meals. They could video conference with their class, their family. They could see who their care team was. Mm-hmm. They could look at their medical record. They can do, and it was all about providing a sense of empowerment to a person that's in a bed, right? Mm-hmm. Empowerment goes away when you're in the hospital. And so that's an example of where we took a firm that was very, very new. Mm-hmm. Now we have them in over in Oakland in the Children's Hospital there, and the Children's Hospital at San Francisco, and in the adult hospital. And I think they have probably 50 customers or better by now.
Well, that's great. And so is that usually that you guys have the bid and people apply, or it just, what's that look like?
Oh, that's no fun. So we are the University of California. We have to follow state rules around procurement. And so there are many boxes to be checked. So one thing to know, there are a few shortcuts whenever it's appropriate, but almost every shortcut gets scrutinized.
Right.
You'll find our procurement department, follows these rules very closely. So it usually involves competing with other parties. With us, it usually means you're going to compete with some fairly large firms and other small firms. And there's a scoring grid that you have to follow, and all kinds of rules like, well, price has to be at least 25% of the score. So I won't go into all the rules, but you do have to have some stamina and persistence in order to get through that process. Now, we do also have relationships with small firms where we will we'll establish a relationship that's more development and experimental in nature, of concept in nature. Mm-hmm. And if we find a capability that is quite unique, then you can establish a different kind of relationship and actually invest in a product that doesn't have to go through that process. Mm-hmm. Call that the exception versus the rule, but it is possible.
Mm-hmm. So I know we don't have much time, but I want to also, with the whole idea about contact tracing now. So how much involvement is your team in deploying part of the contact tracing activity?
Well, so there's two things going on. There's an effort that UCSF is very central to train, 10,000 or so contact tracers and all of that. And we're not directly involved in that. We are working with the city, with the city and the San Francisco Department of Public Health on contact tracing. And I think we want to be aligned with them in terms of the product that we use and the process that we go through, because we're serving the same community and we need to have full interoperability there. That's about the extent of it. I'm not sure to that project.
Oh, okay. Because I was just thinking about, when I think about tens of thousands of people are hired to do all that work, I feel like we have technology that hopefully can somehow make that work more efficient. So manual.
Yes. No, there are several technologies, some of which use proximity tracing. There's a lot of privacy issues around that. But there is a product that offers, is it called Doximity? I'm sorry, I just haven't looked at the products in a little bit, but that do like proximity tracing, so they can notify you that you were in close proximity to someone who has been diagnosed, but it doesn't display any personal information about yourself or about the other people.
Got it.
It identifies it in a way. So, that sounds like promising technology.
I feel like this whole COVID-19 even accentuates the need of technology. And so I'm sure that you'll be busier than ever.
I'm excited about it. I have to tell you, it has opened minds and opened doors that, were just barely cracked open before, right? And we've learned that we can do so many things now, so much more quickly. What I'm looking out for is that we don't allow, we don't kind of go back to our old ways, that we keep this very dynamic.
It does look like telehealth is here to stay.
That's here to stay. Now we're on to bigger and better things.
It's almost like we need to have the telehealth 2.0 or 3.0.
That's right.
What do you see what that 3.0 looks like?
Oh, well, the things that we're pursuing at the moment are around solving the problem of, there are a lot of patients that have maybe a one-night stay at the hospital that you probably could have taken care of at home if you would have had the right monitoring equipment or the right communication channels, and it would free up beds in the hospital for people that are more in the tertiary quaternary sort of needing care. We oftentimes have our hospital consumed with lower acuity patients that delays or even diverts tertiary quaternary care. So we're really, that's the problem we're trying to solve is, okay, how can we actually take care of more people without even coming to the ED? Let's figure that answer out. And there are some other things that we're doing with telehealth right now. Lung transplant patients, for example. I'm sorry, I'm not going to remember the clinical term, but when you blow into the device and it measures your
no, I know it now.
Yes,
I'm blanking on that name too.
I think it's spirometers. Yes. So we have spirometers now that we can send home with them, and they don't have to come back in. They can do the spirometer test from home. The results come into the medical record here, and it's just been hugely popular with our lung transplant patients. Just imagine having to get up and about with your immune system low and having to go to the doctor, and now you can just stay home and do the measurements from there. So, these are very specialized aspects of care, but that's what UCSF does. So we look for those kinds of solutions that we can implement to enhance what, beyond a video call to provide telehealth. And I think we're going to see just more and more of that, and it will drive down the number of inpatient requirements and the number of ambulatory visits for sure.
Yeah, well, that'll be interesting. I know I said last question. So you've been at UCSF for a while, but before you were in you're all in a technology, but tell us how you get to UCSF, what's your background before? I should have asked this question beginning, but I was too excited to ask you about what you're doing right now.
Well, I'm probably not the typical CIO in an academic health center. I have an electronic engineering technology degree, and I went to work for an IT services company called EDS way back when, and maybe 30 years by now. And so I grew up a network engineer and things of that nature, and ultimately got into leadership of various levels. And I worked in the IT services industry for 23 years. In the last 10 of those years, I was supporting all healthcare clients. So Stanford, Parkland Hospital, a few hospitals up in the Oregon space. And it was through that experience that I got a pretty good view into what was happening from a technology point of view. And had done some consulting work for UCSF and had a few relationships, and that helped whenever I applied for the CIO role. So
you're swimming in it.
Now I'm swimming in it, and I have to tell you, I respect the IT industry a lot, but I love being inside of UCSF. It's a completely different experience and much more gratifying.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. It's been great to hear your insight, and especially what you guys are up to during this pandemic time.
Well, thanks again, and I appreciate the opportunity. Take care, Christina.
Thank you for listening today, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes.